Hi, fourth graders. Today we're going to do a fractions review based on what you remember from third grade. So a few things we want to go over when we talk about fractions. First of all, a fraction is naming a part of a whole, a part of a set, or a location on a number line. So you want to keep in mind that fractions are numbers that fall between whole numbers. So between 1 and 2, there are going to be fractions. Between 0 and 1, there are going to be fractions. Your denominator is the number on the bottom of your fraction, and it represents the total number of parts. So here in 1/4, my denominator is 4, which means that I have 4 parts. My numerator is the top number. So looking again at the 1/4, if I have 4 parts, my 1/4 means that only one of those is colored in or was eaten or was left. So the numerator is showing the part of the whole that is represented. And then what we're going to talk about in our topic 8 are equivalent fractions. And all that means is they name the same region, part of a set, or part of a segment. So if you look at these pictures of equivalent fractions, I can see that 4/8 is the same colored in size as 2/4, which is also the same as 1/2. But if you notice, each of these pictures is cut differently. However, the color of blue never changed in size, just the number of pieces did. So that's really what we're going to focus on when we start looking at topic 8. Okay, so again, this is a review from third grade. If you look at the picture, Mr. Peters served part of a pan of enchilada casserole to a friend. What does each part of the whole pan of casserole represent? What part was served and what part was left? So what they're saying is they want you to count all of the pieces, and I can see that there were 6. So each of these little ones is 1/6 of the pan. Then if I look how many are missing or which number was served, that was 2/6. And how many are left in the pan? There are 4 out of 6, or 4/6 of the casserole is left. So in this one, we're talking about parts of a whole, the whole casserole, and then we have parts after it was cut or divided. Remember, fractions must be cut into equal parts. If the parts are not equal, then it doesn't work. All right, so why don't you, in your notebook, why don't you take some time and write down what these fractions look like? So remember, your numerator should be the green part. Your denominator should be how many pieces there are all together. Okay, so you can pause the video and then I'm going to go through the answers. Number 1, you should have 7/8. Number 2 should be 3/4. Number 3 is 2/3. Number 4 is 4/6. Number 5 is 1/3. And number 6 is 2/2. But anytime we have the same number on the top and bottom in our numerator and denominator, that is going to equal 1 whole. So if there's a pizza and it's cut into 2 parts and you eat both parts, you've eaten 2/2 or you've eaten the whole pizza. Always remember that because that's going to help you in 8-2 with number lines. Okay, so another thing, like I was just saying with number lines, is we can place fractions on a number line as long as you divide the number line into equal parts. And you're going to use tick marks to do that. Tick marks are these little lines that are added in. You don't want to count the lines, you want to count the pieces that you divided them into. So I like how it says label the tick marks 0 and 1. That's always a great way to start if you're talking about fractions that are less than 1. And then it says divide the number line into 8 equal lengths. Each length is 1/8 of the whole. And what they're asking us to do is show 3/8. So the directions are start at 0, go to the right until you come to the 3rd tick mark. That represents 3/8. Draw a point at 3/8 on the line and label the point 3/8. And I like what this little speech bubble is saying over here. It says, be precise. You can use a number line to show fractions. The denominator tells you the number of equal parts on the number line. And I think it's important to talk about being precise because fractions are all about equal parts. So if your parts are not equal, it might make it a little bit harder to see your equivalent fractions. Okay, so in numbers 5 and 6, we're going to divide the number line into the given number of equal lengths, then mark and label, the given fractions on the number line. So what I would like you to do on your piece of paper or in your notebook, whatever you have, take the first line and divide it into 3 equal parts. And you're going to notice you only need 2 lines to do that. So divide this number line into 3 equal parts, and then do me a favor and label each of the parts. Okay, I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to let you try that for these 4 problems, and then I'm going to show you the answers. So pause the video and try to work on that. Okay, so this is what it would look like. I know it's a little bit blurry. So you have your 2/3, you have your 2/6, and at the bottom, you have your 4/6 and your 5/8. So just double check those sections. Make sure that you have the right amount of sections. Remember, you're not really counting the lines. And check your work on those. Okay, so let's try these number lines. The same thing. I'm going to have you do them in your notebook. And I want you to fill in the missing numbers. Here's my piece of advice, because some of them get a little tricky because they go past one whole. Okay, so you can see the 2 and the 3 are on here. Always remember that when you line up a fraction with one whole, whatever your fraction is, your numerator and denominator should be the same number. Same thing over here. Whatever you would put here, your numerator and your denominator should be the same. So I know this should take you a little bit longer, but I want you to write this down on your paper and see if you can fill in what those numbers would be. Pause the video here, and then I'll show you the answers. All right, let's take a look at number 1. So you should see right away that all the denominators are 6, and they're going to say 6. They're never going to change on the number line. So you should have filled in 4/6, 5/6. I put the 6/6 there to help me, and then 7/6, 8/6. Keep in mind when your numerator is larger than your denominator that you know that fraction is more than 1. Okay, number 2, all you had to fill in was 1/2, and I was able to see what my denominator would be because it's right here. So that was a clue for me. And then this, I know 1 whole is the same as 2/2. So it would have gone 1, 2, 3. Okay, what about this one? From 0 to 1, there are 2 pieces. From 1 to 2, there are 2 pieces. And from 2 to 3, there's 2 pieces. So even though I don't have any fractions already listed, I can tell that each section between my whole numbers is 2 pieces. I'm not counting all of the pieces. Okay, so here's my 1/2, and then this would be 2/2, and I actually included that, 3/2, 4/2, 5/2, 6/2. Here's a little trick. When I get to a whole number, I can use division to check my work. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. 4 divided by 2 is 2, and 2 divided by 2 is 1. When you're at a whole number, that will always work. So again, that's a good way to check your work as you're doing a number line to make sure that you have the right fractions in the right spots. Okay, let's go over to number 4. Now I can see between 0 and 1, there's 1, 2, 3 spaces, which means my denominator is going to be thirds. So I have 1/3, 2/3. I know that this should be 3/3, 4/3, 5/3, and this would be 6/3 because 6 divided by 3 is 2. So that is another way to help you remember that. Okay, always do that little division. Okay, coming over to number 5. Right away, I knew my denominator was going to be a 2 because here I have 1/2. I know that 1 whole is 2/2. There's 3/2, and then 2 would be 4/2 because 4 divided by 2 is 2. And look, it should be the same number all the time. Okay, so my 1 is 2/2. So if I'm talking about halves, my numbers should match up. But I also want to talk about 3/2 is the same as 1.5. They both mean the same thing. It's just written differently. We're going to do this in our topic 8, but this is called an improper fraction, and this is called a mixed number. There's no wrong way to write it, but I just want to let you know that both of those are good. Okay, and our last one, we fill this in. I can tell that this is all fourths from my denominators that are already there. I know that this would be 4/4, and I know that 2 wholes should be 8/4 because 8 divided by 4 is 2. All right, so now the last thing we're going to look at is equivalent fractions, and we're going to talk about how fractions are equal. So if I use fraction strips and I line up 1/4 and 2/8, I can tell it's exactly the same size, and I can also draw a picture. So I would start with 1/4, and then all we did is we drew a line right down the middle. We never changed the coloring, but you can see that now each of these 4 pieces was split into 2, and the fraction became 2/8. So here, the pictures are already there for you. Pause the video and fill in the fractions that match the numbers that are given. Okay, here are the answers you should have gotten, and it's nice that the visuals are there for you and they showed you what that would look like. 6/6 and 2/2 both equal 1 whole. Okay, let's try a little more practice without the picture, but I think drawing the picture is really helpful and it reminds you of why fractions are equivalent. So if you could pause the video and maybe try to draw a picture for each of these, you'll be able to see how you get the equivalent fractions. Okay, so 1/3 is equal to 2/6. 4/4 is equal to 3/3 because we know these are both 1/2. 1/2 is equal to 2/4, and I think we talked about before, when you're talking about a fraction that's equal to 1/2, your numerator will always be half of your denominator. So 1 is half of 2, 2 is half of 4, come over here, 3 is half of 6, which means that 3/6 is also to equal to 1/2. And our fractions that are 1/2 are going to be really important to us in topic 8 because they're going to help us with a benchmark and being able to compare fractions to 1/2. All right, great job. Nice work. And I think we're ready to start topic 8.